Here at the Canadian Club, we have always been a forum for public figures, thought leaders, and decision makers to share their ideas and inform the most relevant and compelling conversations of our time.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good afternoon, Canadian Club members and guests. Good afternoon, everyone. You are clearly having too much fun. I certainly hope you enjoyed your meals and had a chance to reconnect with lots of old friends and make a ton of new ones as well. My name is Joseph Lowe, President of Canadian Club Toronto, and I am delighted to be your host today. I appreciate those of you who are joining us online thanks to the AV services of Van Valkenburg Communications and livemeeting.ca. We are pleased to be able to offer this option for digital engagement these days, obviously. We are also deeply appreciative of the generous sponsorship provided by Deloitte, making this event possible today. I'd also like to thank Canada's Forest Trust, an ESG company planting smart forests to take positive action on climate change with the power of nature. I'm pleased to share that our partnership will reduce the carbon footprint of our entire season of Canadian Club Toronto events. Now, on a personal note, I'm very happy to welcome back Anthony Ostler to Canada. Anthony and I met more than 25 years ago as young consultants, and even then, it was obvious to me that he was a banker at heart. Since then, he has become one of the foremost leaders of Canada's financial services industry. I'd also like to share this point. The Ostler family has a deep personal connection to Canadian Club as well, where Anthony's father was the former president of Canadian Club Vancouver. Now, with the many changes that we are witnessing in Canada's banking sector, what questions will you have for our guests today? Please use the Q&A cards that you're going to find at your tables. We'll get them to the front of the room to our moderator, Jillian Riley. And for those of you joining us online, hit the Submit a Question button anytime. You'll find that on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will get your questions that way as well. Now it's my pleasure to welcome Todd Roberts, partner and national payments practice leader from Deloitte, who will introduce Anthony. Todd, over to you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Joe. It is my great pleasure to introduce Anthony Ostler, a globally recognized expert on financial services, to the podium today. Anthony joined the Canadian Bankers Association as president and CEO in February of this year, after spending 8 years in the United States, working for State Street in Boston. Anthony has had a successful 30-year track record in banking and financial services and he has worked globally across time zones and geographies, including Canada, the US, Europe, and Asia. And throughout his career, he's taken on critical positions, including Senior Vice President of Investor Relations, Chief Risk Officer, Chief Marketing Officer, and has led operations for several financial institutions, including RBC, Canaccord Genuity, Manulife, and State Street. Anthony brings a unique mix of both breadth and depth and a proven leadership. So he has all the experience to head up the CBA during what is unquestionably a transformative time in the banking sector. Anthony has deep roots in Canada, as Joe was discussing, along with a valuable perspective that he's gained working internationally, which makes him a highly effective leader for the CBA and a strong advocate for this country's banks. In the community, one of the first actions that Anthony took upon accepting the role at the CBA was to join the community campaign cabinet at the United Way Greater Toronto, initiative that is dear to him and dear to many of us in the room today. He serves alongside other community champions, including Darrell White, CEO, BMO Financial Group. We are thrilled that Anthony is bringing his vast experiences back home to Canada and the Canadian Club of Toronto today. After his remarks, Anthony will join Gillian Riley, Executive Vice President and President and CEO of Tangerine Bank, and past President of the Canadian Club Toronto, to respond to your questions. At this point, please join me in welcoming Anthony Ostler to the stage. Thank you very much, Anthony.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Joe. It's great to be together 25 years after our graduation from Ivey Business School. It's amazing how fast time flies. And Todd, thank you for the kind introduction. It's been great to get to work with you over the last 9 months. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here at the Canadian Club in the company of our esteemed head table, our CBA member institutions, our colleagues from the broader financial community, and many valued guests. I'm thankful to be back in Canada after 8 years in the US. I'm delighted to have joined the Canadian Bankers Association. This time last year, the CBA marked its 130th anniversary. It's an organization with an illustrious history that serves an essential role in ensuring our country remains prosperous and our banks remain well-regulated and competitive into the future. Soon after as I started as President and CEO in February, the CBA undertook a member-oriented transformation and examined our core values. We are well underway on our transformation. A key element of our strategic evolution has been to more proactively strive to shape the future for our industry as we navigate change. We also came up with a new purpose, ensuring Canada's banks are at the forefront of growing a sustainable economic future for Canadians. More than 60 domestic and foreign bank members play a central role in Canada's economy. The banking sector accounts for almost 4% of Canadian GDP, employs roughly 300,000 hardworking people, contributed more than $13.5 billion in taxes to all levels of government in 2021, provided $1.5 trillion in credit to Canadian businesses, and played a critical role in helping people and businesses weather the storm of the pandemic. Banks have a deep history in helping to achieve Canada's priorities and are positive forces for a strong, inclusive, and sustainable economy. Canada's banks have a long tradition of nation building. Some of our banks were founded before Confederation and financed the railroads that connected us from coast to coast, and sold war bonds for the government that fought and brought victory in 2 world wars, and helped generations of Canadians buy homes, save for retirement, and grow businesses. Decades of leadership from policy, regulatory, and banking giants built the greatest banking system in the world here in Canada. But we cannot rest on former accomplishments to see us through the way ahead. This is a critical time for Canada and our country's banking industry. There are numerous forces at play that, if not purposely addressed, could hinder the ongoing economic health of our country. This matters for all Canadians because there is a symbiotic relationship between our economy and banks. Healthy banks drive a healthy economy, and a healthy economy is dependent on healthy banks. As part of our efforts to shape the future, the CBA recently provided a pre-budget submission to the federal government. In our submission, we emphasize the need for a renewed focus on growth and creating a stable, strong future based on a healthy, growing economy. There are several important topics covered in that submission, but given our limited time today, I will highlight 3. 1, acting on climate change. 2, the need to future-proof finance. And 3, addressing Canada's productivity challenge. First, acting on climate change. The science is clear. The buildup of carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases in the atmosphere is changing Earth's climate. Banks know the climate crisis is real and recognize the complex challenges our society faces today. Banks in Canada are committed to doing their part to address climate change and help our country transition to a net zero economy by 2050. That's why banks are implementing climate action plans that set specific targets to meet the demands of this global challenge. What's more, banks are already hitting key milestones. By committing to emissions reduction targets for their own operations, as National Bank has done by pledging to reduce from 2019 levels their greenhouse gas emissions by 25% by 2025, by setting reduction targets in their lending, including sector-specific targets, as RBC did in its net zero report released last month, by working with business clients across industries to help them decarbonize and pursue energy transition opportunities, as BMO is doing with their Energy Transition Group, by investing in transformational technologies like carbon capture, utilization, and storage to help clean up existing energy production and accelerate the transition to cleaner alternatives, which Scotiabank is doing through its Net Zero Research Fund and CIBC through new limited partnership investments in low-carbon and climate tech funds. Banks are also launching products to finance new and existing green projects, including sustainability-linked loans and green bonds, which TD Bank pioneered domestically in 2015. Many of our members are also implementing climate-related financial disclosures, tracking financed emissions, and collecting quality data to better assess the challenge. And beyond our borders, our 6 largest banks are playing an active role in global groups such as the UN-convened Net Zero Banking Alliance. This is the climate transition at work. Banks are helping Canada realize its net zero ambitions while also helping meet interim energy demands in a volatile global context, made ever more unstable by Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine. Banks are helping to finance greener sources of energy, but the full transition to net zero will not happen overnight. We must balance the essential need to significantly reduce emissions while ensuring the continued supply of energy and critical products. Some of these may only be obtained through medium-term use of hydrocarbons. Energy is not only key to Canada's economy, but it's also critical to funding our social needs. For instance, oil and gas are crucial energy sources in Canada, necessary for everything from food production to transportation, manufacturing, and heating our homes. Canada and people around the world need this energy. There's simply not enough green energy at this time to meet demand. The 140,000 people working directly and indirectly in oil and gas overwhelmingly share Canada's vision for a low-carbon future. They are in the best position to help us get to net zero, given their deep expertise in delivering the fuel that keeps our country and the world moving. Oil and gas companies are also supporting our energy transition through pivotal investments in wind, solar, and other technologies that will enable our transition. We also know that steeply reducing carbon intensity across our economy costs money. A recent study by RBC indicates that Canada will need an estimated $2 trillion over the next 30 years to finance the transition to net zero. That is more than the entire annual GDP of our country. Canada's banks are key to financing the pivotal technologies and capital improvements that will get us there. From a geopolitical perspective, Canada can supply energy to domestic and global markets cleanly, efficiently, and progressively. International customers prefer Canadian energy sources over those from dangerous conflict regimes because of our strong record on human rights, respect for the rule of law, and tradition of democracy. Deputy Prime Minister Freeland's comments at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. underscored the need for friendshoring among the world's democracies, a view echoed by the U.S. and our closest allies. Now, more than ever, social governance and alignment of values are key factors in securing vital supply chains, including energy. It should also be noted that investment in Canada's energy sector facilitates a return to Indigenous prosperity, a central goal of reconciliation. A recent study from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers found that in 2019, the industry poured more than $2.6 billion of goods and services from 275 Indigenous businesses across Canada, up from $1.5 billion in 2015. Transitioning to net zero presents both challenges and opportunities. A collaborative process is needed for Canada to meet its climate goals and enhancing productivity and economic growth. We can purposely generate more clean energy, grow our economy, and cut our emissions. We encourage the federal government to collaborate with industry to design targeted investments and tax incentives that create pathways to net zero, while taking a balanced and flexible approach to new regulation. We need more carrot and less stick. Recent commitments to spur investment in green technologies, including hydrogen in the 2022 federal budget and the fall economic statement, are steps in the right direction. But more needs to be done to help advance our country towards the ambitious goal of a net zero economy by 2050. Canada's banks are committed to doing their part. My second point today is the need to future-proof Canada's financial services sector, particularly as it relates to payments. Canadians are among the lowest users of cash globally for their day-to-day transactions, and consumers and businesses are eager adopters of tech-enabled banking and payments options. Our banks have been at the forefront of innovation, and Canadians today have unprecedented access to trusted digital channels to meet all aspects of their digital needs, or banking needs. Electronic payments now represent almost 80% of transactions. 2/3 of Canadians used mobile app-based banking last year, and more than a third of financial transactions are done with a mobile device. Significant investments in digitalization and modernization have helped banks anticipate and meet the evolving preferences of their customers, always with a view to security, reliability, and stability. At the same time, technology has enabled an explosion of competition in the financial services marketplace. It is estimated that there are more than 2,000 non-bank payment service providers operating in Canada. Initiatives such as Payments Canada's modernization project and the federal government's Open Banking Initiative will accelerate these trends. The Open Banking Initiative is seeking to more safely enable customers to share their data with third-party fintech companies. However, the fintechs involved in open banking are not currently subject to the same regulatory oversight as banks. While competition is a good thing, policymakers must be diligent as they consider next steps on the retail payments oversight framework. In response to growth of unregulated payment services, the federal government enacted the Retail Payments Activities Act, which empowers the Bank of Canada to supervise payment service providers. The CBA and our members welcome this development. However, at this stage, the oversight framework falls short in that it excludes consumer protection. The payments marketplace is running in front of the regulatory environment. Payment services providers deal directly with consumers, and so the absence of consumer protection is a significant shortcoming. We've all seen the spectacular collapses in emerging finance space resulting in serious and unnecessary customer losses. Let's be clear, we don't want the next FTX or Celsius coming from Canada's payments ecosystem. We're encouraging government to include consumer protection and redress as part of its retail payments oversight framework. This will provide customers with a much-needed trust, confidence, and security to explore and utilize new financial technologies. Canada's banks design tech-driven solutions with consumer protection in mind at every step, factoring in the regulatory connection from exception to commercialization. That's why Canada's well-regulated, world-leading banking sector is strong, resilient, and trusted. Considerable risk lies outside the regulatory perimeter, and non-bank payment service providers need to be brought in prior to gaining more direct access to the payment system. Same activity, same risk, same regulation. That's the answer. Just as we need to future-proof financial services, our country needs to future-proof our shared prosperity and standard of living. Key to that is productivity. Productivity is an essential measure of economic vitality and it's the path to higher, more inclusive growth, job creation, and lower inflation. Productivity is ultimately about creating more with less resources. The problem is that Canada has a productivity challenge. Canadian labor productivity ranks 6th in the G7. An investment in productivity-enhancing areas of intellectual property, information technology, and machinery and equipment are happening at about half the rate in Canada compared to the US. Something needs to be done. An economy with chronically low productivity risks eroding the quality of life of its citizens, harming pensions and social benefits, and making it more difficult to govern effectively. Low productivity can lead to negative cycles of social tensions, tax rate increases, and suboptimal job creation. Canada needs a plan to improve productivity. That plan starts with two key elements. The first is a competition policy that is consistently applied and clearly understood. We're encouraged that the federal government has launched a review of the Competition Act to better align it to a modern economy. The CBA and our members welcome this development, and we will be sharing our views as part of the consultation process. The second is a taxation system that promotes investment and encourages growth. Our current taxation system is increasing the cost of capital and making it harder for companies to make the needed investments for our country to prosper. Canada must start attracting capital and stop scaring it away. This will help build an economic climate that creates the right incentives for growth and supports the net zero transition. The federal government should undertake a comprehensive review of Canada's tax system to align it to the needs of our evolving economy and to ensure our country can compete internationally. Importantly, a review would assess measures that could encourage the investments that will be needed to transition to net zero. As I said earlier, we need more carrot, less stick. We are encouraged to see the Canadian government creating incentives to support investment in climate transition, as tax policy must be considered more holistically to avoid unintended consequences. Since before Confederation, banks have demonstrated their capability to bring capital, knowledge, and resources to support economy-wide innovations. And climate transition is no different. As an example, bank financing of the climate transition would ultimately be multiplied and accelerated through greater coordination with government on tax and investment incentives. This would have a net positive effect on productivity because climate transition and productivity are ultimately about doing more with less. Innovation and productivity are closely linked. A coordinated set of long-term policies that quickly enable and foster scalable private sector investments in clean innovation and assets will guide our country forward. Canada is emerging from a challenging period. Having weathered the pandemic, we must face the challenge of generating a sustained period of strong economic growth to pay down the debts we have incurred, while also getting to net zero and improving productivity. The task now is to build a strong, sustainable recovery that responds to the urgencies of today and maximizes everyone's potential to achieve a better tomorrow. To meet these demands, Canada needs an economic plan that leverages the advantages of Canada's diversity in all its forms. We of course can't talk about productivity without talking about people. While it may seem that banking only looks at numbers and data, ultimately it's like any successful business. It's founded on strong relationships with great people. Our members' employees are the beating heart of the banking industry and our biggest source of strength. Employees are at the center of our continued success, and banks have worked hard to create inclusive workplaces where all employees can thrive and be their authentic selves. CBA member banks have consistently led on the respect for the individual. Significant work has gone into identifying and eliminating barriers where they exist for diverse populations, accelerating the progress of underrepresented and marginalized groups at all ranks. Our industry has embraced action plans against systemic racism, exceeded benchmarks for women on boards and in executive positions, made meaningful progress in Indigenous reconciliation, and championed the rights of all Canadians. The federal government should also be commended for its recently announced 2SL LGBTQI+ action plan. The plan dedicates $100 million over 5 years for a whole-of-government approach to achieve a future where everyone in Canada is truly free to be who they are and love who they love. These advances in the private and public sectors are personal to my family. My wife and I have 2 trans daughters. We returned to Canada after many years in the US as we felt the environment had changed and Canada was the better place for our children like ours. We're grateful to be Canadian and to be back in Canada. But we must protect what makes this country special, our tolerance, accommodation, and respect for human rights. Our collective work to create a more equitable future is by no means finished, but I'm extremely proud that Canada's banks continue to lead by example and champion diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion. Our country faces its fair share of challenges, some of which we touched on today. The road ahead is long, but Canada has the social and economic strength to go the distance. With engaged citizens, a stable political and governing system, and a world-class banking sector, our potential is limitless if we work together towards shared objectives. Join me in looking ahead with optimism and creating a vision for how Canada's banks will contribute to building our shared confident and bright future. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see everyone here in person, and it's really nice to be back at the Canadian Club after many years.
Yeah.
And nice to join you on stage, Anthony.
Yeah, thanks, Jillian. It's fantastic.
That was great. Superb remarks.
Thank you.
I have a few questions for you, and we're open to take questions from the audience as well. So I think there's a process to collect that. So if you have questions, please jot them down. So my first question relates to crypto.
Right.
There's obviously considerable attention and interest around crypto and central bank digital currencies. What do you see as the opportunities as well as the challenges for Canadian banks as we think about this area?
Well, it's interesting. If we think about the payments marketplace that I was just talking about in the sort of regulated and non-regulated spaces, obviously what's going on in most crypto today is outside the regulatory sphere. And some of the concerns I have would be around same activity, same risk, same regulation. But there's a lot of complexity involved with crypto. We obviously have the currencies. There's multiple types of currencies. We have stable coins. Always ask myself, why does something have to have the word stable in the front of it? If it's stable, why would you need that? But anyway. And then there's obviously central bank digital currencies, which there are only a few, but there's things like that being considered. And so the development of that ecosystem has been quite volatile, but in the long run, they're not likely to go away. And so how we address that and approach that is important, because the failures that we've seen have obviously had a big impact on a number of consumers and individuals, and we would not want that to enter into our system. And I think that that's from the downside and the stuff that's outside the regulatory sphere. If we think about a central bank digital currency, the Bank of Canada is studying multiple options, and there's a range of them. And there's retail central bank digital currencies, which would offer people the opportunity to have a form of a digital deposit. How that is done could present opportunities for banks. It could also present threats for banks. And so, for instance, if you think about it, a large DSIB, large bank, has multiple funding sources, including retail deposits, but they can use the wholesale markets. So if a retail CBDC was created, they would probably still be able to get funding. But smaller, medium-sized banks or other entrepreneurial ventures may not have the ability to generate retail deposits. And so if there was a central bank-held retail CBDC, that could actually impact banks and not be an opportunity. The flip side, if the banks, commercial banks, were able to issue the retail CBDC, that may create an opportunity to help customers have that form of digital currency. There's also other areas where CBDCs could be interesting, and for instance, wholesale transactions, and especially foreign exchange. Like, so foreign exchange settlements are quite challenging and expensive. So there's other ways there. But I think the other thing to think about is, as they're designing and moving through those processes, are thinking about privacy for individuals, security, and the overall resilience of the system. And so we know the Canadian dollar is resilient, and so we're thankful that we have the current system we do.
Well, it certainly will be interesting and fascinating to watch how this evolves.
Right.
More to come on that one, I think. We'll be talking about that for many years to come. Moving a bit into the federal government.
Right.
Earlier this year, they introduced higher taxes on financial institutions, and in addition to that, a one-time levy.
Yep.
What is the position of the banks on this, and how do you think this will impact the Canadian economy? I think you talked about this a little bit in your speech. But
Sure, yeah, I alluded to this, so I anticipated you may ask me this question. So, if you think about it, we need taxes to fund our economy and the different things, and so everyone understands that. Like, there's taxes are like death; it's a certainty, right? But the reality is it's important when you're thinking about a tax policy for corporations or business that you create a neutral structure. And so singling out a sector for a special set of taxes goes against that thought process of tax neutrality. And so that contributes to creating a whole bunch of knock-on effects. So regardless of the sector, a sector that gets picked on, their cost of capital goes up because they obviously have less earnings. And so what shareholders would be willing to pay for their equity goes down. So that's an impact, which means it impacts shareholders. Well, every Canadian is a shareholder of a Canadian bank, be it they have CPP or their mutual fund or their retirement savings in some form or other. We're all shareholders in Canadian banks. And so when our banks get taxed more, we automatically get a lower valuation. But then when they get taxed more, our banks can't grow as quickly because they have less money left over that they're generating that could either go into loans for customers or investing in innovation and technology, hiring new employees, and also returning as dividend to shareholders. So there's a knock-on effect of that policy from that perspective. Then there's the raising the cost of capital for all companies, because if you're an international investor, and I've met many, I've traveled around the world and met investors in 4 continents, when they look at a country like Canada, we're 3% of the world's market cap. And so it's like, tell me a little bit what's going on, whatever. So when they're thinking about Canada, to have to add on another variable, oh, you have a government that could randomly up my taxes? Well, I think I'm gonna stop spending time on 3% of the world's market cap and go look elsewhere. And so we actually increase the cost of capital for all Canadian corporations by creating uncertainty around who could be next. And so that gets back to that productivity angle. And then if we think back more holistically, we've got a very complex tax system that has been layered on without a sort of master plan and no strategy. And we want to incent people to invest $2 trillion to fund our net zero transition. But why would they want to put money in Canada? Let's say they put something into a technology that's super successful. Maybe they'll get taxed randomly for developing a technology in Canada. Maybe they should do that somewhere else where they know it won't be randomly attacked. So there's all these questions that actually impact. It's not just covering some bills for the pandemic. It's actually impacting our ability to fund the future.
So this is, there's a follow-on question from the audience, actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you don't know this one.
Yeah.
This one is about, it relates to what you were just talking about, productivity.
Right.
And so how can banks boost productivity?
Right, that's a great question. So there's a lot of ways how banks can boost productivity. We didn't mention this, but I started 30 years ago as a bank teller. And I was at RBC in Vancouver, and we had these old little terminals, and they had green screens, and it was really quite interesting. About 6 months into that, they did a new workbench, and it was incredible what it did, because there were a whole bunch of steps that were taken out of the process steps that we had to do, and that gave us more time to serve our customers. And then all of a sudden, we were getting trained on to how to give them advice, or if they're doing a large deposit, hey, do you want to get an investment or a GIC, or that kind of stuff. And so we were able to do more for our customers to address their needs and less on paperwork. And that's just a little example. I know it's from 30 years ago, but why I wanted to bring that up is Canada's banks have been investing in technology and improving systems and processes for a long time. And that builds on itself. And decisions that are made decades ago create phenomenal opportunities. And we improve processes and innovate, invest in technology. We're better able to have more interesting jobs. Obviously, I was a bank teller once. I now have a much more interesting job. But we all have, I love that job. I learned so much about financial services and products and how to serve people. And some of the things I do today to look after my members it's the same attitude I did looking after someone that was wanting to buy a GIC or make a deposit, right? So there's some core elements there, and I think that that history of Canadian banks continually investing, improving processes, investing in technology, advancing new products and services, and trying to think how they can better serve their customers has well set that up.
Maybe I'll just add on, because this is an interesting question. I also started 29 years ago. I hate having to admit that. And the amount of paper that there was in banking, many, many years ago. And now I'm working in a digital bank, and to see the progression of technology and digital, 70% of all transactions are now, or more, I think you said two-thirds, but at Tangerine it's 80% plus that are being done on the mobile phone.
That's incredible.
right? People are sending money, they're paying bills, they're looking at their balances, and COVID certainly accelerated that.
Yeah, it definitely accelerated that. And those behaviors have stayed, right? It's amazing.
Yeah, so I think we'll continue to see more
Yeah.
digitization in banking. I'm going to move
Yep.
to a different topic a bit here. So it's surprising to hear that Canada still doesn't have free trade within its own borders. I guess there's subtle barriers that exist. Many corporate leaders over the years have called for a national integrated market in Canada to facilitate the seamless flow of capital, goods, and services between provinces and territories. Do you think this is something that's worth pursuing?
Very much so. So if you think about, I mentioned at the beginning of my speech about we're making an effort to try at the CBA to try and shape the future. We know this has obviously been multiple times that this sort of topic has come up, but this was one of the 9 items we included in our pre-budget submission because we think it's important to inspire all of our leaders, both federally and provincially, to get to the table and think about the opportunity we have here. It's easier in some ways to do business and trade between Canada and the US or Canada and Mexico than it is across our provinces. And the great thing about Canada is we have this great diversity in cultures and economies and different strengths and weaknesses in each economy, but we collectively make a great country. But we're actually holding ourselves back. And this in some ways is another core component of the impact in holding back our productivity. And so if we have a million jobs that are unfilled today in Canada, I would imagine that some of those could be filled by people that could move, but because of barriers to either qualifications or other elements, they're not able to take those jobs. And similarly, there's a significant amount of opportunity from the point of view of optimizing the uses of resources, right? So we're holding ourselves back by being too parochial or worrying about our own smaller regions instead of thinking about how we collectively could grow the pie and advance the economy. And so a key thing to think about is this isn't necessarily a federal issue because obviously we're a confederation. We need our provincial leaders to step up and participate in this process. But the best way to do that is obviously for federal leadership and bring them to the table and encourage that and create a program to really tackle some things that really are arcane and don't reflect our modern economy but are holding us back and impact our ability to fund things like the transition.
So I was kind of fascinated by this whole topic. I didn't really realize that there were barriers across the country. So I did a little bit of research on this topic, and I saw that stats show that almost 4% of our GDP would go up if we could break down some of these more subtle barriers that exist.
Yeah, we wouldn't need a bank tax if we had that jump, right? So, it's good.
So I'm going to move to open banking because you mentioned it in your remarks. It's obviously top of mind. I'm quite involved in it myself. And it's certainly a priority to establish an open banking system. So what do you think the views are and how is it progressing? Maybe give us your perspective on how open banking and the framework is moving forward in Canada. We've got a lead now out of Ottawa. Yeah.
So I think most people in the room may know, may not everyone know, but open banking is in what context we're talking about is to enable people to share their information between institutions. And often how that's done is they may have an app on their phone that is maybe pulling their credit card information from CIBC and their account and investments from RBC and maybe their mortgage at BMO or something. And it pulls it all together in one spot and they can see all their balances instead of having to go to 3 different apps. So great concept, but each one of those bank accounts or accounts and profiles have their own different logins and passwords, and one of the reasons they're all set up that way is there's security, reliability, a whole bunch of encryption and other things that are done to protect that information. If you just grab any app on your phone, maybe you're the product. Is it free? Like maybe they're selling your information on or profiles. You don't know what's there for you because there aren't necessarily the protections currently in place to ensure that people are actually being looked after. The open banking initiative is something that came out of this growth in fintech applications and the need to have some structure. And Canada's banks and other large institutions like Desjardins are participating in working closely with the open banking lead that was appointed earlier this year to help develop a framework that can securely move that information around. And so what's great to see is we understand our clients want to have applications like this. We want to meet our clients where they are and where their needs are. But to address that, we need to make sure that it's secure, reliable, and safely designed and looked after. And so that process is still unwinding. I mean, I would imagine you may be involved in it. It'd be interesting to get your perspective on it. But our members are very much participating in the desire to make sure that it's secure and safe.
Yeah, I think you've said it very well. It's about creating choice for our clients, but doing it in that safe and secure way that you mentioned. What I see happening across the industry and with government is that there's a very collaborative approach in a good Canadian way.
Right.
And I sort of think the stakeholders are working very well together on things like privacy and security and accreditation of who's in the ecosystem. And I think there's a plan to do that in a very, very productive and proactive way for Canada. So I see it progressing in a positive and collaborative manner.
Yeah, and I'd like to think, like, back in my day of being a teller, Canada's banks obviously protect your money very carefully, right? Well, we also do the same thing for your data. I'm not convinced every fintech has the same treatment of your data like we treat your money. And so what I'm hoping is that the Open Banking Initiative will address some of those risks so Canadians will be protected, because I think sometimes they assume they're protected. It's not until something gets leaked or their identity stolen or other things happen, or they may not even know what's happening to their information. And so I think it's key that we continue to support that initiative and get the progress we need. Yeah,
I agree with that fully, yeah. It's important. It's in a lot of other jurisdictions that are a little bit ahead of where we are, I think, in Canada on this topic. There's a really good question here from the audience that I think this is the last one. Most Canadian banks now have global presence and operations, so outside of Canada's borders. You spoke about your expectations from the Canadian government and regulators. Are there any efforts, this is a really interesting question, are there any efforts to consolidate global payment laws?
That's a good question. I'm not familiar with the rules in that space. Although I've worked globally, I have not worked globally in payments, so I'm not sure. Todd, do you know the answer? But,
it depends which types of payments you're talking about,
yeah.
Right? I think there's different. SWIFT would obviously be a global moving money globally.
Yeah.
And then you'd have more retail payments that would be in Canada, like Interac, and Visa, MasterCard, I guess, would be considered a global payment. So those are those would be governed locally, but also in some ways globally.
Thank Lord Jillian's here, eh? And also, you can see where my learning curve is. I'm actually going to a payments conference in 2 weeks because I know I need to learn more about it. So
there's lots of different types of payments, and it's a broad question. So I'd say some have some sort of global oversight, and others really don't. They're very Canadian-made, like in Interac. So I think we're nearing our end here, but this has been very enjoyable.
Oh, likewise, thank you.
Welcome, and we're delighted to have you. Looking forward to the future.
Thanks, Jillian. I really enjoyed it.
Anthony, on behalf of the Canadian Club, our members, or guests, thank you so much. It's great to have you back in Canada. I want to sincerely thank you for your thoughts and sharing them so articulately with us this afternoon. The Canadian Bankers Association has a dedicated champion at the helm, and the nation's banking industry has a fierce advocate committed to advancing the issues that will ensure a strong and sustainable future for generations to come. I wish you a long and successful tenure in your leadership role, and we're looking forward to welcoming you back to the podium soon. And to you, Jillian, it's always a pleasure to be at the podium with you here at the Canadian Club. Thanks for your deft moderation, and great to see you as well. Audience, today's event marks the last one, sadly, for our calendar year. On Wednesday, January 11th, 2023, feels funny to say that out loud, the club will feature our 46th annual Outlook, known as Canada's best political economic forecast lunch. I hope that you can join us for this very popular event featuring some of Canada's leading business people and business journalists. I'd like to offer another round of sincere thanks and appreciation to our sponsors today, Deloitte. Thank you, Todd and Raman, for it's been great to have you here with us today. And to all of you joining us online, as well as here in the room, thank you so much for being with us. Have a safe and happy holiday season, and look forward to seeing you in the new year. All the best.
Thanks so much, Julian.
Thanks.